The air was thick with the lingering scent of rain, the kind that came just before dawn and left the world feeling renewed. Ava sat in her favorite corner of the cafe, a small, quiet place tucked in the heart of her city, far away from the noise of her usual life. The window beside her framed a view of the bustling streets, but her gaze was distant, unfocused. There was a weight pressing down on her chest, an invisible burden that had been growing heavier each day for the past few months. Ava had always prided herself on being strong, resilient. She had built her career from the ground up, a successful marketing strategist with a reputation for excellence. But despite her accomplishments, something had changed in her. It wasn't just the endless meetings or the pressure to deliver results. It was a deeper feeling, a quiet unease that gnawed at her even when she was alone with her thoughts. She was trapped in a cycle of high expectations, self-imposed pressures, and the constant need to be perfect. No one saw it. On the outside, Ava was the picture of success. But beneath the surface, anxiety had begun to chip away at her peace of mind. She feared failure, feared judgment, feared that one misstep would bring everything crashing down. The fear was relentless. Her phone buzzed on the table, pulling her from her thoughts. It was a message from her colleague, Mark. "Great job on the pitch yesterday. You nailed it." Ava read the words and felt a fleeting moment of relief, but it was quickly replaced by a familiar question. Was it enough? She had pushed herself to the limit preparing for that presentation, but it never felt like enough. Across the table, her best friend Lila smiled warmly at her. "You've been quiet today, Ava. Is everything okay?" Ava hesitated, her fingers tracing the rim of her coffee cup. "I don't know, Lila. It's like I'm stuck. I feel like no matter what I do, it's never going to be good enough. Like I'm running in place and getting nowhere." Lila leaned in, her expression softening. "You're not alone in feeling this way, Ava. But you don't have to keep pushing yourself so hard. You've already accomplished so much. Maybe it's time to stop trying to be perfect and start being human." Ava laughed, though it felt strained. "Easy for you to say. You don't have the same kind of pressure on you." Lila's eyes sparkled with a knowing glance. "Pressure's just a choice, Ava. You get to decide how much you carry. What if the next step is finding peace, not perfection?" Ava didn't answer right away. Didn't. Lila's words hung in the air like a quiet invitation, one that seemed impossible to accept. She'd always believed that perfection was the key to success, that anything less would lead to failure. But here, in this moment, the idea of letting go of that relentless pursuit was both terrifying and liberating. Ava's life had always been a careful balance between achievement and self-imposed expectations. Growing up in a small town in Ohio, she had always been the overachiever, the one who spent hours studying while the other kids played. Her parents, well-meaning but demanding, had instilled in her the belief that hard work was the only way to succeed. They had set the bar high, and Ava had spent years climbing toward it, convinced that once she reached the top, she would finally be able to breathe. Her move to the city after college had been both thrilling and overwhelming. The pace was faster, the stakes were higher, and the opportunities, though plentiful, came with their own set of challenges. Ava had landed a job at a prestigious marketing firm right out of school, a dream that felt far out of reach just a few years earlier. But now that she had it, the dream seemed weightier than she had expected. She found herself constantly comparing her success to that of her colleagues, feeling like an imposter even when she received praise. It was a constant tug-of-war between the need to excel and the growing anxiety that no amount of success would ever be enough. In contrast, Lila, her lifelong friend, had always seemed to glide through life with an ease that Ava envied. Where Ava saw obstacles, Lila saw opportunities. Where Ava worried, Lila trusted. They had been inseparable since childhood, even though their personalities were as different as night and day. Lila was a free spirit, a yoga instructor who had never been concerned with climbing a corporate ladder. She embraced life with a carefree attitude, something Ava couldn't understand, at least not fully. Lila had been there through every one of Ava's milestones, offering encouragement, listening to her rants about difficult clients, and offering advice that Ava sometimes ignored, but always secretly appreciated. Yet despite their close bond, Lila was often frustrated by Ava's constant pursuit of perfection. "You're more than just a set of results, Ava," she'd tell her, but Ava rarely listened. The idea of slowing down, of letting go of her move to the city after college had been both thrilling and overwhelming. The pace was faster, the stakes were higher, and the opportunities, though plentiful, came with their own set of challenges. Ava had landed a job at a prestigious marketing firm right out of school, a dream that felt far out of reach just a few years earlier. But now that she had it, the dream seemed weightier than she had expected. She found herself constantly comparing her success to that of her colleagues, feeling like an imposter even when she received praise. It was a constant tug-of-war between the need to excel and the growing anxiety that no amount of success would ever be enough. In contrast, Lila, her lifelong friend, had always seemed to glide through life with an ease that Ava envied. Where Ava saw obstacles, Lila saw opportunities. Where Ava worried, Lila trusted. They had been inseparable since childhood, even though their personalities were as different as night and day. Lila was a free spirit, a yoga instructor who had never been concerned with climbing a corporate ladder. She embraced life with a carefree attitude, something Ava couldn't understand, at least not fully. Lila had been there through every one of Ava's milestones, offering encouragement, listening to her rants about difficult clients, and offering advice that Ava sometimes ignored but always secretly appreciated. Yet, despite their close bond, Lila was often frustrated by Ava's constant pursuit of perfection. "You're more than just a set of results, Ava," she'd tell her, but Ava rarely listened. The idea of slowing down, of letting go of the control she so desperately sought, felt like a betrayal of everything she had worked for. But lately, something had shifted. Ava had started to feel the weight of Lila's words more deeply. Maybe it was the sleepless nights, or the constant fatigue that no amount of caffeine could fix. Maybe it was the growing distance she felt between herself and the people she loved. Lila's suggestion to start being human resonated with her more than she wanted to admit. Ava took a deep breath, her eyes returning to the window. The rain had stopped, and the city seemed quieter now. The world, with all its busyness, had somehow slowed down in that moment. It was almost as if the universe was offering her a chance to reconsider her choices, to shift the way she approached everything, to find balance. "Do you really think it's possible to let go of all this pressure?" Ava asked, her voice softer than before. Lila's eyes were filled with compassion and she nodded. "I do, but you have to believe it first. You have to be willing to release the idea that your worth is tied to your achievements. Life is too short to keep running on empty." Ava felt a knot tighten in her stomach, the familiar discomfort of uncertainty taking hold. Release my need for perfection. It seemed impossible. She had spent years building a life around that need, a life where every detail was meticulously planned, every decision calculated. But in that moment, she realized that it wasn't the perfection she craved, it was peace. The two friends sat in silence for a few moments, the weight of the conversation hanging in the air. Ava's thoughts were racing, but she felt a strange sense of calm as well. Maybe there was something more to life than getting everything right. Maybe being was enough. "I'll try," Ava finally said, her voice quieter now but filled with determination. "I don't know how, but I'll try. To let go of the need to be perfect." Lila smiled warmly. "That's all I'm asking." The following week was a blur of meetings, emails, and the usual chaos of Ava's professional life. Despite her resolve to change, the pull of her old habits, her drive to be perfect, to perform at the highest level, was stronger than she had anticipated. She had promised herself that she would focus on being present, on taking things one step at a time. But every new task, every client request, felt like a test she needed to pass. Ava was in the middle of drafting a major marketing proposal for a new client when her phone buzzed. It was Mark again. "We need that proposal by 3 p.m. today, no exceptions. This is a big one." Ava glanced at the time. It was already past noon. The pressure to deliver had never felt more suffocating. She squeezed her eyes shut, trying to breathe, trying to ground herself. Her mind was racing. "Stay calm, you can do this. You don't have to be perfect, just finish the draft. It's enough." But the words felt hollow. In the back of her mind, the thought lingered. "If I don't get this right, everything will fall apart." The fear was all-consuming, gnawing at her confidence. Her hands shook as she typed, deleting and rewriting sections of the proposal over and over again. She couldn't stop herself. Her eyes flicked back to the clock. 1:30 p.m. She had only an hour and a half left to finish, but the task still felt impossible. A knock on the door interrupted her frantic thoughts. It was her boss, Carol, a sharp and ambitious woman who was known for her no-nonsense attitude. Carol was always calm under pressure, her confidence radiating in every word, and Ava couldn't help but admire her, sometimes to the point of jealousy. "You look stressed, Ava," Carol said with a half-smile. "How's it going?" Ava forced a smile, trying to keep the unease from showing. "I'm on track, just finalizing some details for the proposal. It's almost ready." Carol leaned against the doorframe, her eyes scanning the room as she waited. She didn't look convinced. "You know, Ava, you don't have to overthink everything. The team trusts you. They believe in you. Just trust yourself a little more, and you'll see it's easier than you think." Ava nodded, but the words didn't settle. She wanted to believe Carol, she really did. But how could she let go of that inner voice that told her nothing short of perfection would be acceptable? The pressure to prove herself was unbearable. As Carol left the office, Ava felt her heart race even faster. She couldn't ignore the fear bubbling up inside her. "If I mess this up..." The thought was too terrifying to finish. A knock sounded on her door again, and this time it was Lila. She stepped into the room with her usual calm, a stark contrast to Ava's anxiety. "I knew I'd find you here," Lila said with a small smile. "How's it going?" Ava laughed bitterly. "Terrible. I've got a million things to do, and none of it feels good enough." Lila walked over and sat down across from her, studying Ava with a quiet, knowing gaze. "You're doing it again, aren't you?" Ava froze, not wanting to admit the truth. But Lila knew her too well. "You're pushing yourself to the edge, trying to be perfect, and it's only making things worse. You don't have to be perfect, Ava. You just have to show up." Ava wanted to argue, to tell Lila that if she didn't give everything her all, everything would crumble. But deep down, she knew Lila was right. She didn't have to be perfect. She just had to do. I don't know how to stop, Lila. It feels like if I don't keep pushing, I'll lose everything." Lila reached across the desk and placed a gentle hand on hers. "I get it, but perfection is a prison, Ava. It's not freedom. You need to find a way out." Ava took a deep breath. A way out? It sounded impossible, but she realized she couldn't keep living like this. Constantly afraid of failure, constantly afraid of falling short. Something had to change. Ava's day didn't get any easier after Lila left. The pressure she had been trying to fight off only grew stronger as the hours ticked by. The ticking clock on her desk became her worst enemy, each second reminding her that she was running out of time to finish the proposal. She kept telling herself she wasn't going to be perfect, that she just needed to do her best. But her mind kept returning to the fear of failure. By the time the proposal was finally done, Ava felt like she had run a marathon. Her hands were sore from typing. Her eyes were bloodshot from staring at the screen for so long. She took a deep breath and sent the file to Carol, her heart pounding in her chest as she clicked the send button. As the minutes passed, Ava couldn't sit still. She checked her email obsessively, waiting for Carol's response. What if she didn't like it? What if there were mistakes? The anxiety was unbearable. When Carol's email finally came through, Ava almost couldn't bring herself to open it, but she did. "Great job, Ava. You've really outdone yourself on this one. We'll present this to the client tomorrow. I'll need you there for the pitch." The words should have felt like a victory, but instead, they only made Ava's heart race faster. She had done well, but the pressure to do even better tomorrow was already creeping in. The stakes felt higher now, and with each passing minute, Ava could feel the pressure building again. She thought about what Lila had said, perfection is a prison, but the concept of letting go seemed as far away as ever. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the ceiling, trying to catch her breath. But the stress had already taken hold of her again. That evening, she met with Lila at a local cafe. Lila had been busy with her yoga classes all day, but she made time to meet with Ava, sensing her friend's unrest. Ava sat down, her shoulders slumped, looking exhausted. "You look like you need a vacation," Lila remarked with a grin. Ava chuckled weakly. "I wish I could just escape for a while. Honestly, I feel like I'm drowning." Lila leaned in, her expression growing more serious. "Tell me what's going on. You've been tense all week. What happened today?" Ava hesitated, swirling her coffee cup. "I finished the proposal. It's done. But now there's the presentation tomorrow, the pitch. I'm supposed to be confident, but I'm just terrified that something will go wrong." Lila's gaze softened. "Ava, you've been living in this constant state of fear for as long as I can remember. You're always trying to be perfect, and it's eating you alive. But what if you stopped trying to control everything? What if you let go of that need to be perfect and just trusted yourself?" Ava bit her lip, staring at her coffee cup. "I don't know how, Lila. I've built my whole life on being good enough, on being perfect. What if I'm not good enough without it?" Lila reached across the table and placed her hand on Ava's. "You are enough, Ava. You always have been. You don't need to prove yourself to anyone, not even to yourself." Ava's chest tightened at the words. "I am enough." The thought felt foreign, almost impossible to believe. But as she sat there with Lila, she realized something. Maybe Lila was right. Maybe it wasn't about being perfect. Maybe it was about being human, as Lila had said before. "Maybe I need to take a step back," Ava said quietly. "Maybe I need to stop trying to control everything and just breathe." Lila smiled. "That's the spirit. It's okay to make mistakes, Ava. You're allowed to be imperfect. You're allowed to be you." The conversation lingered in Ava's mind long after they parted ways. As she walked home that night, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted in her. The thought of embracing imperfection, of taking a step back from the constant drive to be perfect, was daunting, but it was also oddly freeing. The next day, the pressure was back. The client meeting was nerve-wracking, as Ava had expected. She stood at the front of the conference room, presenting the marketing proposal to a room full of executives. Her hands shook slightly as she clicked through the slides, but she was more focused than she had been in days. The fear was still there, but this time she didn't let it control her. She took a deep breath before each slide, reminding herself that she was enough. When the meeting was over, there was a moment of silence before Carol spoke. "This is great, Ava. The client is impressed. Excellent work." The words didn't have the usual weight they carried. Ava didn't feel the same rush of relief that she had in the past. Instead, she felt calm, a quiet, steady kind of peace that she hadn't realized she had been craving. The pitch had gone well, but the anxiety was less consuming now. Maybe it was because, for the first time, Ava had allowed herself to let go. As she walked back to her desk, she felt a small but significant shift inside her. She had been so focused on perfection that she had missed the beauty of the process, and now, for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was starting to breathe again. Ava had never been one to enjoy the spotlight, yet after the successful client pitch, she found herself thrust into the limelight. Her team praised her for her effort, and Carol was quick to assign her more high-profile projects. It was everything Ava had worked so hard for, but it also felt overwhelming. She had spent the entire weekend relaxing, trying to shake off the tension from the previous week. But as Monday approached, the weight of her responsibilities came rushing back. The work felt endless, and for the first time, Ava realized that her drive for perfection wasn't just about proving herself to others. It was about avoiding failure, about keeping her anxiety at bay. It was Monday morning, and she sat at her desk, staring at the new project brief that Carol had sent her. It was huge, more than anything Ava had worked on before. The proposal was a high-stakes one, and Carol was depending on her to deliver. As Ava read through the project details, a familiar feeling began to creep in. The old anxiety, the need to control everything perfectly, began to claw its way back. "I can't mess this up," she thought, gripping the edge of her desk. "I won't. I can't afford to." But then, as she closed her eyes for a moment to calm her racing thoughts, something unexpected happened. Her phone buzzed with a notification. It was a message from Lila. "Hey, how's everything going? Remember, you don't have to be perfect." Ava smiled at the text, but the smile faded as quickly as it had appeared. "You don't have to be perfect." The words were a reminder, but they also sparked a new wave of doubt. Lila had been telling her this for weeks, and Ava wanted so badly to believe it. But could she really let go of everything she had worked so hard for? Could she truly embrace imperfection without risking everything she had built? Just then, her phone buzzed again. It was an email from Carol, and as she opened it, her heart sank. "Ava, I've reviewed your proposal draft and we need to make a few adjustments. The client isn't sold on the direction yet. Let's meet later today to go over the revisions. Please make sure everything is top-notch." Ava's stomach twisted. Top-notch. The words echoed in her mind, the pressure mounting with every passing second. Top-notch. Perfect. She knew what that meant. She had failed. She hadn't done it right. Despite all her efforts, she wasn't good enough. The weight of the email pressed down on her chest, and for a moment, Ava couldn't breathe. The anxiety was back, stronger than before. She stared at the email, trying to calm her nerves, but it felt impossible. All the work she had put in, her attempts to take things one step at a time, her efforts to let go of the constant need for perfection, it all felt like it was slipping through her fingers. But then, in the back of her mind, she heard Lila's voice again. "You don't have to be perfect." Ava closed her eyes and took a deep breath. "I don't have to be perfect," she reminded herself, but the thought felt alien. Could she really face this challenge without falling back into her old habits? Was it possible to find balance without compromising the work she had built her career on? She stared at the screen for a long time, the weight of the email pulling her in one direction while Lila's words tugged her in another. For the first time in a while, Ava didn't have the answer. She didn't know if she could escape the prison of perfectionism. But one thing was certain. Something had to change. Ava stood up from her desk and grabbed her jacket. She needed a break. As much as she hated to admit it, she needed to clear her head. Outside, the air was crisp and the streets were bustling with life. She walked aimlessly for a while, her mind racing, the pressure of her work gnawing at her. As she passed a small park, she noticed a young woman sitting on a bench, sketching in a notebook. The woman was smiling softly as she worked, lost in her own world, her pencil moving effortlessly across the page. Ava stopped, watching her for a moment. The woman's calm demeanor struck her. She was so at ease, so comfortable in her imperfection. In her process, Ava felt a pang of envy. How can she do that? How does she just live? Ava wondered. She felt like she was always running from something, always fighting against a current she couldn't control. Then the woman looked up, meeting Ava's eyes. She smiled warmly and waved, as though inviting Ava to join her in that peaceful moment. For a brief moment, Ava considered sitting down next to her, striking up a conversation. But the thought of doing something so simple, so unproductive, filled her with unease. It was a strange thought. But for the first time in a while, Ava realized that maybe it wasn't about always moving forward. Maybe it was about taking a pause. She shook her head and kept walking, but the image of that woman, so unburdened by perfection, stayed with her. The following days after the unsettling email were a blur of meetings, deadlines, and self-doubt. Ava's mind swirled with thoughts of failure and perfectionism, and no matter how hard she tried to shake them, they clung to her like a weight around her neck. She worked tirelessly on the revisions for the proposal, each hour feeling like a battle. But no matter how much she tweaked and adjusted, the nagging feeling that it would never be enough never left. The more she tried to perfect it, the more distant the sense of satisfaction became. The familiar rhythm of her work, where she would pour every ounce of herself into achieving flawless results, felt empty now, like a cycle she couldn't escape. That afternoon she sat at her desk, her fingers hovering over the keyboard, when the door to her office opened. Carol stepped inside, looking unusually serious. "Ava, we need to talk," she said, her voice soft but stern. Ava's heart sank. She quickly closed her screen, hoping the sense of impending criticism wasn't as strong as it seemed. "What's going on, Carol?" she asked, trying to keep her tone casual, though her voice betrayed her anxiety. Carol sat across from her. "I've noticed you've been a little off lately. Your performance has been great, but you've been distant. Is something going on?" Ava's mind raced, searching for a way to explain her sudden disconnect. She could feel the pressure of Carol's eyes on her, like they were digging into her soul. She wanted to tell her the truth, that she was struggling with the weight of perfectionism, that she was burned out from constantly trying to be perfect. But the words didn't come. "I've just been feeling overwhelmed," Ava said, offering the most neutral explanation she could muster. "There's a lot on my plate. I'll get it done. Don't worry." Carol's eyes softened. "Ava, I don't want you to burn out. I've seen you do this before, work yourself to the bone, then crash. You're a talented designer, but if you keep pushing yourself like this, it won't end well. You need to talk to me if you're struggling. You can't do everything on your own." Ava swallowed hard. "I'm fine," she said, though the lie tasted bitter. "I'm fine." She wasn't fine, but she didn't know how to admit it. Carol gave her a long look. "You know you don't have to be perfect, right? You don't have to prove anything to me or anyone else here." Ava's breath caught in her throat. Carol's words echoed in her mind, but they didn't settle comfortably in her chest. She wasn't sure she even knew what it would mean to stop trying so hard. After a long silence, Carol stood up. "Take a break, Ava. You need it. You can't keep going like this." Ava nodded, though she didn't feel relieved. Instead, she felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice, unsure whether to take a step back or continue pushing forward. Later that evening, Ava met Lila at a quiet bar they both frequented. The exhaustion from the day weighed heavily on her, and the pressure of it all had started to take its toll. Her mind felt foggy, and she struggled to process the conversation with Carol. Lila looked up as Ava sat down, her smile softening when she noticed the weariness in Ava's eyes. "You look like you've been through the ringer," Lila said, setting her drink aside. Ava chuckled weakly, her shoulders sagging. "I think I'm burning out, Lila. I've been trying to prove something, trying to be perfect, and I don't know how to stop." Lila's expression grew more serious. "It's okay to admit it, you know. You're not a robot. You don't have to be perfect. But you've been chasing this idea for so long that it's hard to see beyond it. You've built your whole identity on this drive for excellence, but now it's taking more than it's giving." Ava felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "I know, but what if I let go of that drive? What if I'm not good enough without it?" Lila took a long sip from her glass before responding. "What if you're good enough already? What if you stopped measuring your worth based on how much you can do or how perfect something is? You've always been enough, Ava. You don't have to keep proving it." Ava's chest tightened as she processed Lila's words. "I don't have to keep proving it." The thought was so simple, yet so difficult to accept. How had she gotten so lost in the need to be perfect? The conversation lingered in Ava's mind long after they parted ways. For the first time, she truly began to question her relationship with perfectionism. It had served her well in some ways, but now it felt like a heavy burden, something that had made her feel alive, but now only made her feel exhausted and isolated. The next morning, Ava sat in her office, staring at her laptop. The pressure of the proposal was weighing on her, but now Something had shifted inside her. She thought back to the conversation with Carol, and then to Lila's words, "You don't have to be perfect." She opened the proposal file and began working on the revisions. But this time, she did something she'd never done before. She took a step back. She made adjustments without overanalyzing every word, every image. She let go of the need to control everything and instead focused on what felt right in the moment. Ava felt a strange peace as she worked. The anxiety still lingered, but she no longer allowed it to consume her. She was present in the work, not chasing an ideal version of it. By the end of the day, the proposal was ready, but something had changed. Ava didn't feel that rush of adrenaline that came with completing everything perfectly. Instead, she felt relieved. The weight had lifted. As the weeks passed, Ava's approach to work and life gradually shifted. She stopped beating herself up over every mistake, every misstep. She found herself still striving for excellence, but with a new awareness that perfection wasn't the only path to success. She realized that it was the effort, not the flawless result, that mattered the most. Her team at work began to notice the change. At first, they were confused by Ava's softer, more relaxed approach to projects. But as the weeks went on, the results spoke for themselves. The proposal she had worked on with so much anxiety had been a success, and her client had praised the authenticity of the design, something Ava hadn't even realized she was incorporating until she saw it through a new lens. Carol, too, noticed the difference. During their weekly check-ins, she'd comment on Ava's more grounded demeanor. "Ava, you've really found your groove," Carol remarked one afternoon. "You're not only more creative, but you're actually more present with your team. I see a lot of growth in you. Keep this up." Ava smiled, grateful for the praise, but also a little surprised. She had never thought of herself as creative in the traditional sense. Her mind had always been fixated on getting the technical details just right. But now, she was finding that allowing herself to take risks, to step away from rigid expectations, had opened new doors in her work. Outside of the office, Ava's life began to shift too. She had dinner with Lila a few weeks after their conversation at the bar, and they talked about everything: relationships, future goals, fears, and dreams. Ava shared how much she was learning to let go of perfectionism, how it had been freeing in ways she never thought possible. "I've started making mistakes, and it's okay," Ava admitted. "I mean, it's terrifying, but I'm beginning to think that mistakes aren't the worst thing in the world. They just mean I'm trying something new." Lila laughed. "That's the spirit. You're human, Ava. You're allowed to mess up. It doesn't mean you're failing. It just means you're learning." Ava felt lighter after their conversation. It was funny how something as simple as acknowledging her mistakes could feel so freeing. She didn't have to hide them, didn't have to cover them up with perfection. Instead, she could learn from them and move on. Her personal life also began to change. She found herself being more open with her friends and family about the pressure she had been under for so long. At first, they were surprised. Ava had always been the one to keep things together, the one to shoulder the burdens. But once they understood the depth of her struggle, they were supportive and encouraging, offering their love and understanding. One Saturday afternoon, Ava spent the day with her parents, something she hadn't done in a long time. Over dinner, her mom casually mentioned something that struck a chord. "You know, Ava," her mom said, "I've always been proud of you, but I never wanted you to feel like you had to be perfect. We love you just as you are. You don't have to prove anything to us." Those words hung in the air long after the meal was over. Ava realized she had never given herself the same unconditional love that her family had always given her. She had spent years trying to live up to impossible standards, even in her personal life, in her relationships, but it was never about being perfect. It was about being real. One day, Ava was sitting at her desk working on a new project for a startup client when she felt a wave of calm wash over her. It was a strange, almost unfamiliar sensation. For the first time in years, she wasn't obsessing over the details. She wasn't worried about making a mistake. She was simply doing the work and it felt right. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lila. "How's the project going?" Ava smiled to herself and typed back, "I'm doing it my way, no pressure." Lila responded almost immediately, "That's the Ava I know. Proud of you." Ava closed her eyes for a moment, feeling grateful for the change in herself. She was still a work in progress, of course. No one could completely let go of their old habits overnight. But she had come so far. She had learned to embrace imperfection, to accept that mistakes didn't make her a failure, but rather a learner, someone who was growing. Ava had always been afraid that letting go of perfection would mean losing her sense of self, but she now realized it had only made her more whole. She could still be the ambitious, hard-working woman she had always been, but now she was also a woman who could breathe, who could laugh, and who could make mistakes without falling apart. As she hit send on the final proposal draft, she leaned back in her chair, feeling an overwhelming sense of relief. It wasn't perfect, but it was done, and that was enough. Ava stood at the window of her apartment, looking out over the city skyline. The sun was beginning to set, casting a soft golden light across the buildings. It had been several months since she'd started making the conscious decision to let go of her perfectionism. In that time, her life had changed in ways she never imagined. Her relationships had deepened, especially with her family and friends. Lila had been a constant source of support, always reminding her that she was enough just as she was. Work had also evolved. Ava still poured herself into her projects, but no longer with the same frantic energy or obsessive need for perfection. She was no longer afraid to show vulnerability, to admit that she didn't have all the answers, or that she was struggling, and most importantly, she had learned to love herself, flaws and all. That evening, she sat down at her desk, ready to tackle a new design challenge for an upcoming client. But this time, she wasn't consumed by anxiety or fear of making mistakes. She was simply excited to do the work, her work. As she opened her laptop and began sketching, the doorbell rang. Ava glanced up, surprised. It was rare for anyone to visit her at this hour. She opened the door to find Carol standing on the other side, holding a bottle of wine. "Thought we could celebrate," Carol said with a grin, stepping inside. "I heard you just wrapped up that proposal you've been working on for weeks. How'd it go?" Ava smiled, her heart swelling with gratitude. "It went well, really well actually. I think I've finally learned that I don't need to be perfect to succeed." Carol raised an eyebrow. "That's a big step, Ava." "It is," Ava replied, her voice full of warmth. "And I couldn't have done it without the support of people like you." Carol laughed softly, setting the wine down on the counter. "I think you're selling yourself short. You're the one who made the change. You're the one who took the first step." Ava shook her head, smiling. "I guess I did, but it wasn't easy. It took a lot of letting go, of the idea that I had to do everything perfectly all the time. But now I feel like I'm finally living, like I can breathe again." The two of them sat down on the couch, sipping wine and talking about life, work, and everything in between. For the first time in a long time, Ava felt at peace. She wasn't trying to force anything or achieve a false ideal. She was simply existing, embracing the process rather than the outcome. As the weeks turned into months, Ava continued to grow, still facing challenges, of course. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the urge to revert to old patterns crept in. But now, she was able to recognize those moments and let them pass without giving them power. She knew that she wasn't perfect, and that was more than enough. Her relationships flourished. Her work became even more inspired and authentic, and she felt a renewed sense of creativity that had been dormant for years. She began mentoring younger designers at the agency, sharing her journey with them and encouraging them to embrace imperfection as part of the creative process. Ava's life was no longer defined by unattainable standards. It was defined by the willingness to grow, to learn, and to be present in the moment.